Begin the current Daf, Mesechta Kidushin Daf Chav Beis, begin 6 lines down at the top of the Yomid, where we continue explaining the halacha of a previous Mishnah. The second Mishnah in our Mesechta, we're already 20 blot in, we're only 2 Mishnayos in, but we were speaking about the kinyan of the Eved Ivri, and specifically the second stage of the Eved Ivri, when he decides, you know what, I love my master, I love my wife, I want to stay longer till Yovel. So that's called the Nirtza, he gets a hole in his ear. The Gemara continues to explain the halachas of how an Eved could become this Nirtza type of Eved. Shir's Kosbaz by Kalzach and Cheskel turned to Daf Chaim. We should bring today's Daf. Some discussing today's Daf, like I mentioned, is the Nirtza. An Eved Ivri becomes a Nirtza only when the following conditions are met. As the Gemara is going to explain from different sources, that Shiyim V'Yishna has to Daf Zog and Tzvay Mol, he has to say it 2 times. Ishu Vanim, he has to have the wife and kids from the Adain. He has to say he loves his master, and the master has to love him. Him and his master can't be sick. Additionally, the Gemara teaches us that the master is obligated to feed his wife and his kids, not just the Eved himself. Then we continue to the third Mishnah in our Perika Masechta. The Eved Kanani, moving on from the Isha Niknas, the woman, to the Eved Ivri, to the Eved Kanani, is acquired. Bekesef, that the one who's buying has to pay money to the seller, or Bishtar, accepts the sale document from the Meicher, or Bechazaka, the Eved serves him in some way. Those are the 3 ways a person could acquire an Eved Kanani. So begin the current Daf Chav Beis, 6 lines down at the top of the Yomid. Says the Gemara, the Brisa says, Tanaban. Pasuk says in Shemais, Im Omar Yoimar, if he's going to say, I love my master, my wife, my kids, I don't want to leave from the slavery. What's Im Omar Yoimar? Sounds redundant. It's actually Yom V'Yishna, yeah. It's until he says it and he repeats it. And these 2 things that he has to say has to be at 2 different times, as the Brisa explains. He says in the beginning of the 6th year, in the beginning of the 6 years, it doesn't say whatever, sheish, the beginning of the 6th, and meaning all the way in the beginning. It doesn't say at the end of the 6 years. And the Nirtza, he's not going to be able to become this Eved Nirtza who stays on to this slavery. It says in the Pasuk, I don't want to go free, which is obviously you have to say it when it's time to go. He's saying, no, I don't want to go. So it has to be at the end of the 6 years. At the same time, let's say he says it at the end of the 6 years. He didn't say in the beginning of the 6 years. In the Nirtza, he's also not going to become an Eved Nirtza. Why? Shemit says in the Pasuk, Eved, which is Eved. You say when he's a slave, when he's going free, he's not a slave anymore. So you got to say in the beginning of the 6 years and at the end of the 6 years. If you say that one and not the other, the 2 psukim teach you're not going to be able to become the Nirtza. It has to be when you're an Eved, and it has to be when you're going free. However, the Gemara comes to explain this Brisa now. So the time of the Brisa said like this. Shibi says in the beginning of the 6 years. So the Gemara assumes right now, it literally means to say, in the beginning of the 6 years, when he's just signed up to be the slave, he's starting out, he has to say it then, I don't want to leave. Right. Yeah. Right. So the Gemara is going to have a similar type of a question. But let's say she didn't say at the end of the 6 years. He says in the Nirtza. He doesn't become a Nirtza because it says in the Pasuk, you have to say, when you're about to go out, it says, no, I don't want to go free. So therefore, if you said in the beginning and at the end, it's not going to work. It says the Gemara, what are you saying that if he doesn't say at the end, it's not going to be good because he didn't say, he's not saying when he has to leave. He only said in the beginning. Typically, in the beginning of the 6 years, he doesn't have a wife and kids, like you asked, that he didn't have a Shevach Kananis yet. He just signed up. So what he's saying that the reason is because not Mekayim the Pasuk Lo Eitzei Chavshi, he doesn't have a Havtiyas Adoinias Ishteiz Banai. That's question number 1. Besu, question number 2, you said that Amma B'Seib Sheish, we said at the end of the 6 years, didn't say at the beginning of the 6 years, and it cannot become a Nirtza. Shinem, because in the Pasuk, the Brisa said, Ha'eved, he's got to be a slave, and that's only the beginning, not at the end. What do you mean? Atur Seib Sheish Lab Ebru? You think at the end of the 6 years, like Rashi explains, the last day, which is at the end of the 6 years, that whole day he's still a slave. So why did you have to say in the beginning of the 6 years? There could also be still an Eved. Some Rabbi explains it, which answers both questions. He says, you're right. My betchila sheish. What did we mean to say in the beginning of the 6? It means every time we said the word tchila sheish, It meant betchilas pruta achroina. It meant the beginning of the last pruta, when he's starting the last currency, according to the calculation of when you diminish and you see that clock that diminishing how much money he has left on the contract, that is when still a shava pruta worth, which that's the monetary value of an eved. That's what it meant betchila sheish. And the my b'seif sheish, what did it mean every time we said at the end of the 6? We meant b'seif pruta achreina. After you started the last pruta, it's called seif because you're not an eved anymore, because you're not worth a pruta. So this is how you have to translate the brisa. Oma betchila sheish. If he said in the beginning of the 6, doesn't mean beginning of the 6 years. It means in before the last pruta, which is the last day he's there. Where he already has the isha banim. So he could say a haftias adonias ishtias banai. But he didn't say b'seiv sheish, meaning after when he started the slavery of the last pruta, then he cannot become an irtza. Even if he says it and repeats it a second time. Why, says the Brisa? Because he says lo eitzei chavshi, which has to be when you're about to leave. And as long as there's still a full pruta that is owed, it's not samach liyitzia. And then the Brisa said if he repeats it and he says it all at the end of the last pruta, but he didn't say it in the beginning of the last pruta, he cannot become an irtza because it says eved until he says it when he's an eved. Once the last pruta has started, so although technically he's still eved, but he's not an eved anymore because there's no monetary value on him. So that's betchila sheish and seif sheish. It doesn't really mean the beginning of the 6th year. It means in the beginning of when the 6 years of slavery apply versus the end of that. And that the Gemara is qualifying, says Rava is so it literally could be 2 seconds later. When you have, I don't know how much a prut was worth from this guy, it could have been a minute of work was a prut is worth. But when he starts the moment before the last minute, and then he starts it, that's already, he could say it the next second. That's when he has to say it the 2 times of Lo'etzechav. She has to be when I don't want to go free. That's when you're not a slave anymore. That's going to be when you already started the last prut. At the same time, it has to be Amiyama Eved. The first time you have to say it, which has to be when you're still an Eved, which is when you're still at least some prut is worth of slavery. Yeah, you can't do it anymore. It's too late. Very small window. Yeah, no. I mean, the lo'etzei chavchi. Right, the lo'etzei chavchi has to be. That's the more difficult one. Right, that would be interesting. I mean, it has to be, unless you say that the first time has to be when he's still a slave, and the second one could be when he's already done. It just has to be at least you started the prut achroina. Could he say it after? Could he say it a day later? It's a good question. The Gemara doesn't say clearly on that point. Right. That's what the Brisa is saying. We don't find anyone that disagrees on this halacha. Now, in another Brisa, other halachas that are necessary for this guy to become a nirtza. Loi ishu banim. If the slave has the wife and kids. Now remember, the wife and kids are not his own previous wife and kids. The wife and kids are the shivcha kananis, is the maidservant that the master gives him. A haftis adonis ishtes bana in the parsha doesn't mean his own wife and kids, means that the master gave him a shivcha kananis, and then he had children from them, and he's like, I like my slavery, because if I leave, I'm not going to have this master, this woman, and this children anymore. So let's say the slave has isha banim. Ulerabbe ein isha banim. But the master, his own slave owner, doesn't have a wife and kids. In a nirtza, doesn't become a nirtza. Why? Because it says in the pasuk in Parshas Re'eh in the Varim, because he loves you and your family, which means to say that the adon osa has to have a wife and kids, and not just the slave. Now let's say l'rabba isha banim. Let's say the master has a wife and kids, but v'lo ena isha banim. But the slave does not have a wife and kids, and the nirtza does not become a nirtza. It says haftis adonis ishves banai. You cannot become the eben nirtza unless you also have a wife and kids. Let's say who oyeves rabbi. He loves his master, but rabbi eno oyeva. It's not a two-way street. His master does not love him. And a nirtza cannot become a nirtza. Why? It says in the pasuk ki tov lo imach, because it's good for him with you, which not just good for him. It's got to be good for him with you. Meaning, say you also like him. Let's say Rabbi Oyavoy, let's say his master loves him, but he doesn't love his master. In a nitza, cannot become a nitza, because never it says in the pasuk, because he loves you. If it doesn't love you, cannot become a nitza. Number 5, who chayla, let's say the Ebed is sick, but Rabbi Eino chayla, his master is not sick. In a nitza, cannot become a nitza. Why? Because never it says in the pasuk, ki toiv lo imach, because it's good for him with you, excepting if he's a sick person, then it's not good for him. So, good child. The different areas halacha, we say it in different things. And sick is not for the mishka. It's not a mechish be'alma. He's in bed. Yeah, it's a good shayla. Rabbi chayla v'oina chayla. Let's say his master is point number 6 that's required. It's Rabbi chayla v'oina chayla. If the master is sick and he's not sick, in a nirtza does not become a nirtza because it says in the pasuk that it's good for him imach with you, which means to say it's got to be good for you also. If you're sick, then it's not. So these are the 6 qualifications that is necessary for the Eved Ivri to become the nirtza. Now, Boy Rabbi Babai, he has a question. He says, what happened if Shneim Chaylin Mai? What happens if both of them are sick? What's the question? So the Gemara explains. On the one hand, imach bi'inan va'ika. It has to be good for him with you, and you have that because you guys are both in the same bed. You guys are both the same. It's got to be good for you with him. It can't just be the same. It's got to be both good. And you don't have that because you're both sick. This is going to take it. The one says, let's sense interesting. Why that's a question? It sounds like it has to be toivla imach. Why would that be a shayla? But that's the Gemara shayla. Now that pasuk that I mentioned before, that because it's good for him with you, he wants to stay on. What does it mean it's good for him with you? So we mentioned this brayso previously. Imach b'meichel, imach b'mishta means to say he gets to eat with you, he gets to drink with you. You should not be eating this refined bread. And he's eating this coarse bread. You're drinking this aged wine. He's drinking the new wine. And you're sleeping on top of these comfortable bedding. He's sleeping on the straw. No, it has to be that it's good for him with you. Whatever you're doing, you're going on the VIP line, he's with you. They said, whoever buys a Jewish slave, is like buying a master for himself. Now, similarly, right, so that was really the Taisus that we brought before from the Yerushalmi that said that really, you're right, he should be the same as you, but the Maisa that's Midas Dain, because anyways no one's using it. So what is? Right, he's just asking, that's not imach. Imach. Right, the Shaila, someone asked me actually that when after that shiur, when we did that on Friday actually, he said that what happens if you have one pitcher of water and you're in the desert, right? And right, so Chayach also applies to all these things also, yeah, in Chalami. Right, but that's really what Taisa says. Taisa says, like me this time, he said, in Chalami. You don't have to give it to him because you also don't have. But he says, but then Midas Sedaim, what are you going to do with it anyway? No one's using it anyway. So you have a Chiyav out Midas Sedaim. He doesn't have Toivla Imach. You have Toivla Imach. So I'm saying, I'm trying to remember what the exact Nekuda was. But the point is that you're not using it anyway, so you'll give it to him. Right. Right, then they can. What? Right. Well, there's two things. There's becoming a nirtza, and then there's when you have an eved, how you have to treat him when he's an eved. So in the Chadam, if you don't have to treat him better than yourself, but the pillow shmooze is because no one's using it anyway. You only have one pillow. If you have two, of course you have to give him as you have yourself, but you only have one pillow. It's okay. You don't have to give it to him. But what are you doing with it now? You can't use it because it's not Tevla Yimach. Because leave it down the side. That's midas time. So you'll give him the pillow. Oh, that's what someone told me. Right? They said you're not going to be able to sleep. Right. Moshe Bash would tell me after. He says, "Pasha if he said it from, he says it's not going to be able to sleep. He knows the Eved is Nebuchadnezzar sleeping on the stroy." Oh, the Eved, man. No, that he didn't say. No. Terminal in the Bryces. The Gemara continues in a similar vein about how he has it good, this Eved Ivri. That it says v'yotze mi'imach. It says, okay, he's going to leave from you. Who of imay? Him and his sons with him. Which, as Rashi points out, this obviously is talking about his Jewish family. Because if it was talking about his non-Jewish family, the wife, the shifcha that he gives him, it says ish bildeha tila deneha. That we know stays by the oven. So if it's going out, it must be talking about his Jewish family. Shomar B'Shimei says, I don't understand what's going on. If he's sold, is his wife, if are his sons and daughters sold too? Obviously, that means to say that the master is obligated to feed this guy's kids because they're leaving. When are you leaving? Who invited you in the first place? Obviously, that the other has to take care of his kids too. Similarly, you say it says in the pasuk, if he was a married man, his wife goes out with him. Rabbi Shloimy says, I understand. If he sold, his wife sold as a slave. Obviously, that means the master has to feed the wife too, because she's saying she's going out with him. What about whoever brought you in? Obviously, the master has to take care of her too. And we have to say both, that he has to feed the kids and that he has to feed the wife. Why? The Yeshmin the Banav had we say the kids, because kids, they're young, they're minors, they can't go ahead and work and feed themselves. So I would say that that's who he has to feed. But regarding the guy's wife, who she could work and get a job, I would say, yeah, let her work and feed herself. So you have to say the wife too. If we only said the case of the wife, I would say the love dircha. No, it's not really the norm of a woman to go knocking on doors, because it's shameful for the woman to do that. But regarding the sons, that they have no problem knocking on the door, collecting, they're knocking on the door, collecting for this athon, next athon, whatever it is they're collecting for. I would say that no, that let them go knock on doors. Therefore, we have to say both of them, that the other has to support the whole entire family when he buys this Eved Ivri. Now, continue on this theme of the Nirtza that we told him, learn the Brisa, continue to Medbeis. The Brisa says that when we know the halacha talks about when he wants to become the Nirtza, it says that they take his ear and they make a hole in it by the door. Now, Ilanema Azna Badelas, had it said his ear in the door, so I would say Yidker Keneged Azna Badelas, that you would go ahead and make a hole opposite his ear in the door. That's what the Gemara says. The Gemara is going to ask that in a second. But the Gemara says, had it said, Oznoi Badeles, because the pasuk says, the Hagisha Adonai B'Lakim, the master is going to take him to the court, and he's going to bring him to the door or to the mezuzah, and says, V'rotza Adonai Oznoi B'Martzeh, and he's going to make a hole in his ear in B'Martzeh with the all. V'Avod Elohim is going to serve him forever. And it says that, similarly in Devarim, you're going to take the oil and you're going to put it in his ear and the door, and he's going to be Eved La'olam. So the Bryce is saying, had it said that Oznoi Badeles, that his ear in the door, so I would say what you're going to do is, you're not going to make a hole in his ear. You're going to make a hole in the door opposite his ear. Which the Gemara says, Deles in Oznoi Loi? What, in the door and not in his ear? Really not in his ear? But it says in the pasuk in Shemais, it says that the master is going to make a hole in his ear with the awl. So what are you saying that I would have thought to say that you can make only hole in the door? So it says the Gemara, no, Elisa, what I would have said was, I would say, when you're in the outside, when you're far away from the door, then you'll make a hole in his ear, like it says es aznai, and then beyond the chena, place the ear al hadelis on the door, and you'll take this martzeh, this drill, the yidkir keneged oznai badelis, and then on the other side, opposite the ear, you make a hole in the door. So you put the ear by the door. So tamalema, that's I needed to have the pasuk in Devarim to say no, but oznai uvadelis, in the ear and in the door. So okay, so how does this work? Meaning, I would have thought to make a hole in the ear, then bring the ear to the door, and then you make a hole in the door opposite the ear, but not in the door and the ear. So that's why okay, so no, it says ba'asna uva delis means to say that it's the one drilling. You drill through his ear, which you placed on the door, until you get to the door. That's how you do it to make him this Eved Nirtza. Now, when it says delis, that you bring him to the door or to the mezuzah. So Shemani, I would think Bein Akura, whether the door was ripped off the doorway and it's on the ground. Bein Shein Akura, whether it's not ripped off and it's there on the doorway. No, it says you bring him to the delis oy ela mezuzah, or to the doorway. Now ma mezuzah, just like the mezuzah, the side posts are standing up, because or else it's not called a mezuzah. It only has the name mezuzah because it's the side posts. Avdelas nami umed, it comes to a door. Door is a door no matter where it is. No, but therefore it's comparing it to the mezuzah to say it has to be standing up on the doorway, just like the mezuzah is when it's standing up on the doorway. Now the Gemara concludes the discussion of the Eved Nirtza with an Agadic teaching. Rabbi Yochanan Mizaka he doidish as a mikra hazeh kamin chaymer. He expanded this pasuk like a chaymer. Rashi says chaymer means like a pebble of a pearl, or the bundle of the besamim which hanging on the neck as a tachshut. This is a little bit different, but be that as it may, it means to say like a gishmak pshat. That what? What's the ear different than all the other limbs of the body? Why is that specifically getting a hole from everything else? So Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, the ear that heard my voice on Har Sinai. When I said to me the Jewish people give me slaves, meaning we're not slaves to slaves. But this guy goes acquires a master to himself, which is one of my slaves, and now he sells himself as a slave to the slave. Hiratza should get a hole in his ear. Which interesting, Tosha brings a medrash that martzeya, this tool that we keep on talking about, is gematria 400. And because the Jews were slaves 400 years in Mitzrayim, because Baruch Hu redeemed them, this guy goes acquires a master to himself. Therefore, he should get a hole with this martzeya. There's a numerical value of 400. After 6 years, what? Why doesn't he get? Yeah. Right. No, he's asking the famous question about why would you only by a nirtza who wants to stay on get a hole in his ear? Then every Eved Ivri that the shayla is also how he became an Eved Ivri, right? He says nimkala is a machur bezdin. Machur bezdin, it's not his own fault. He's not acquiring adon la'atzmai. Right. So that's only when he wants to stay on, and he says he's doing it willingly.
It's just like Klal Yisrael is forever. The Eved has to be Yaviyachol forever.
Oh, La'ilam.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not like really servitude.
Right.
The Neitzah for 6 years.
Right. That might be why the Neitzah, exactly. Right, so that's a different thing about stealing, right? Rabbi Shimon Rabbi, one more Agada teaching. He says, he expounded this pasuk like a chaymer. What's the difference between the door and the doorway? All the utensils in the household, you're going to go and dafka make them a nirtz over there. Kadosh Baruch Hu said, they were witnesses in Egypt. That's where the name Pesach comes from. Shem jumped over the doorway and the lintel. I said to me, the Jewish people can be slaves. Not slaves to slave. I took them out from slavery to freedom. And he went and acquired a master for himself. In front of them, he should go ahead and have his a hole in his ear made. That's the reasoning for the halacha of the nirtza. Now we continue with the third mishnah in this mesechta, continuing on this kinyanim ha'isha niknis, very long parak. There's in Kidushin not that many prakim, but still longer mesechta. And we're up to the third mishnah only, which again continues on the kinyanim of Adam, the acquisitions of a person. Which the first one was the theme really of this mesechta of isha niknis, which is that of Kidushin. Then we had the Eved Ivri, and now we have the Eved Kanani. The Eved Kanani, the non-Jewish, which Rashi says all the slaves are called after the Canaanim, but it refers to any non-Jewish slave. The non-Jewish slave, his nickname is acquired the kesef with money, and meaning that he pays the seller, b'shtar with a document, and ubechazaka, and with the Eved serves him in some way, he takes possession of him. That's how you acquire the non-Jewish slave. And the koine es atzmai, the non-Jewish slave will acquire himself back to freedom from his master, either bekesva de acherim, that others will give his master that this non-Jewish slave should become a free person, but he himself cannot accept the money from them, even if it was on condition that his master should have no rights in it, that he could give it to his master, because this Tana holds that an Eved Kanani does not have any acquisitions without his master getting all those rights. So it has to be that has to be the money through someone else to redeem him, to buy him out, or b'shtar de atzmoi, or that he himself receives the document of emancipation from his master. That's Divrei Meir. The Gemara is going to explain the entirety of Meir's opinion and the next one of the Chachamim. Because Chachamim, they disagree. They say, no, bekesev al de atzmoi, with money, not al de cherem. No, it's actually through himself. Ubishtar de cherem. So they're the inverse of Meir. And the document actually is through others receiving the document. We'll see in the Gemara the reason for that. Now, regarding money, it has to be, however, although it's through himself, but the money has to be someone else's money. Because again, the Eved doesn't have anything. Because if he finds something or receives a gift, everything goes to his master. If he's coming to redeem himself through himself, it has to be that the money is from someone else, but they gave it to him on the condition that his master has no rights in it. So even the Chacham who say that the kesef is al dei atzmoi, but that kesef has to be from other people's monies. So now the Gemara explains the halacha of our Mishnah that we spoke about, that the Eved Kanani is acquired in 3 different ways. So it says the Gemara Menolam, where do we know these 3 ways of acquisition? Because the Chesiv, it says a pasuk in Vayikra. It says, V'snachaltem oisam, you're going to bequeath them, your slaves, levneichem acharechem, to your sons after you, loreshes achuza, for inheritance of holding, which hekishna kasa. The pasuk is equating the Eved Kanani l'stei achuza, to your fields of what you have possession of. Mas de'achuza, just like your ancestral fields that you have possession of, nikne bekesed b'shtar b'chazaka, they can be acquired with either these 3 ways of money, a document, and possession, which we're going to learn out in the parak later on, of Chavav Med Aleph, the source for that. So the pasuk is equating af Eved Kanani, so to the non-Jewish slave, nikne bekesed b'shtar b'chazaka. That's the one source that teaches these 3 ways of acquiring the Eved Kanani with money, a document, and chazaka. So then the Gemara wants, wait a second, if you really compare, just like then the ancestral field. If you sell the field, it goes back to the owner in the able year of Eved Kanani. So to the non-Jewish slave, when you sell him, it should go back to the original owner when it comes to the able year. That's what the pasuk teaches, that forever you should enslave them. And as Taisa points out, don't say here, La'olam means only to the that would be the case, then you shouldn't have said anything, and I would need from this de'achuza, which only lasts. Coming to teach me that no, it's forever that the one who has the slave keeps the slave in slavery. Now the Gemara says, Tana, there's actually other ways to acquire an Eved Kanani that was not mentioned in the Mishnah. Tana went in the Braisa af b'chalipin. It can be acquired also with the transaction of kinyan sudar, of a transference. Now, so the Gemara explains, why didn't he say milsa, something that applies to an Eved? The lesser that doesn't apply by other bimetaltal and by other movable items. Now, Eved is a movable item. Only that which was unique to Eved was katani. That's what we learned in the Mishnah. But milsa, something like chalipin, the isa that applies also by other bimetaltal and other movable chalipin, like Katani, we didn't have to tell you that. Of course, Eved could be acquired by chalipin. He's no less than a regular movable item. We just have to teach you kesef, shtar, and chazaka, which those things are unique for the kinyan of that of. That's the chiddush of the pasuk, like l'reshes achuza, but he's a movable item too. So that's what the Gemara is saying. That we knew he would be acquired with chalipin. Yeah, in that way. Another kinyan. It says, Eved Kanani nikna b'meshicha. He can be acquired by being pulled. Ketzad, says the Gemara, how so? How does this work? So takpa, you grab a hold of him forcibly, and he comes to you. So that was meshicha. You acquired Eved Kanani. Pull him, and he comes to you like on a volition. That's not considered meshicha. It's not called that you're pulling him. So the Gemara wonders here also why we didn't mention our Mishnah. Bishlam Tamadidan, we understand according to the time of our Mishnah, we're not going to ask regarding this halach of Shmuel. Why didn't we say that another way you could acquire Eved Kanani is with Mashiach? Because you can answer like we said before. Our Mishnah didn't say things that are applicable by movable items, which if that's the, and Mashicha is something that applies by movable items. The less of metal tikatan. We only said things that don't apply by metal. The problem, however, becomes a Tana Bara, the Tana, the Brisa that said the kinyan of Chalipin with these other kinyanim. That's difficult on Shmuel, that if it's true that the Evet Kenan would be required with Mashicha, Nisna Mashicha, because the Tana Brisa did say things that apply by metal. Why didn't the Brisa say Mashicha like Shmuel? Says the Gemara, no, Kikatani, the Tana of the Brisa only said things that are milsa de isa that apply beim b'mekarkoi beim b'metaltli, things that are by both, which like chalipin, which that he combined, he taught with the other thing, and metaltlin, and the Evet Kanani is both. Metaltli is karka and not by karka. Like a Tani, the Tana Brisa was not mentioning also Mashiach, so although he held like Shmuel, he didn't say that because we wanted to say things that are only kinyan by both of them, because the Eber is like both. But although you're right, he really has Mashiach, but since it's only a kinyan metal, therefore the Tana Brisa didn't. Shmuel is teaching that Ketzad, how is it that you're telling me it works for Mashiach? So Shmuel said, Takva Yavatzla, if you grab him and he comes to him, Kani acquired him, that's Mashiach. Kachavatzla la Kani, but if he calls him, he comes to him, not acquired him because that's not Mashiach. Says Gemara, really? Calling him to make him come is not considered Mashiach to be kind him? But Tanya in the Brisa, and this Brisa is regarding an animal. The Mishnah teaches later on of Chafei Beis that a behemagasa, like a cow, the larger livestock, they are acquired with a handover. So the Brisa says Ketza b'Mesira. How does Mesira a handover? It's achza foot of the cow, or besara, for example, the hair on the head, the horse, or the horse, or beshliv shaleha, let's say the load that's on the horse, or beprumbi shabepi, or the bit that's in its mouth, or bezug shabetzavaro, or the bell that's on his neck. No, that's handover. Now, ketza b'Mashiach, and this is the point we're asking from. How does Mashiach work when you're doing an animal pulling it? This is the question on these words. If you call to it and it comes with a stick, runs in front of him. Once it removes one hand and foot and to move in that direction, you acquired it already. Rabasi, he says, asked that go in front of him a full of its height, as we'll see already this halacha later on. But the point is that you see that just calling it and making it go is qualified as Mashiach. So why are you telling me that Mashiach is not going to work for the Evet Kanani? The Gemara says, they say there's a difference between the Behema and an Evet Kanani. Behema, daiti demacha azla. When an animal is totally instinctual, and when the one who's calling it calls it, it goes because of the one who's calling it, because it doesn't have its own. No, the master calls, it goes. The slave is going with his own intelligence. Therefore, that's not considered something that the master is doing to the Eved. He's thinking, oh, this guy's calling me. I don't come. He's going to hit me. He's going to, who knows what he's going to shoot me. So he goes. That's not considered something you did. You pull, then you did. You call, he's coming. You're not pulling. Or Mashiach by Eved, although. Now, Amar Ravashi says, however, Eved Cotton, a minor slave, which does not have intelligence, he will be like an animal. So if you call the minor slave, and for the purposes of acquisition, and he comes, then you will acquire this Eved Cotton. Now, explaining the Mishnah and Shtar, how does the chazaka work to do chazaka? The Brisa, hitulay min alay. If the slave unties the shoe of this buyer of him, or he takes his garments after him to the bathroom, or if she he anoints him, or gardai, which is Rashi says gratabalaz, which like you cut off the fingernails and the tough skin, like that he scrapes him to do this. Taking care of his hygiene. Or he'll bisha, you get some dress. And Eli puts on the shoes. up the one who's buying him. These are ways of serving him. So kanai, with any one of these actions, the master has acquired the slave. That's what the Tanna Kama says. On that, Reb Shimon says, Loi te chazaka gedolim hagbah. The kinyan of chazaka, which is what the Tanna Kama is talking about, should not be bigger than the kinyan of hagbah, when you lift up something to acquire it. Because hagbah kind of b'chal. The halacha of hagbah, that's such a kinyan, works everywhere. We have so many kinyan that are limited. Hagbah works everywhere. Zichah hagbah has to work. So the Gemara might come out. What is hagbah of a kinyan in general have to do hagbah over here? The hagbah that the Tanna Kama was talking about was that lifts up. Here, the slavery, the buyer who's enslaving him to acquire him with chazaka. So what's Rabbi Shimon talking about? So Rav Ashi explains like this. Tanna Kama was saying, when the slave picks up the master, the master has acquired him, because by lifting him up, you're able to reach that Cheerios box from on the top of the cabinet, whatever it is. That's active slavery. He could be a rabbi, but what the inference was that the Tanna Kama was saying, but if the master lifts up the slave, he has not acquired him. It's only if the slave lifts up the master. That's what Rabbi Shimon says, no, chazaka, which is what the Tanna Kama was saying, when the slave lifts up the master, should not be bigger than hagbah, which when the master lifts up the slave. Because hagbah applies everywhere. So this says the Gemara, now that you said that according to everyone, that when he lifts up his, the Gemara says the following question, interesting question. If that's the case, that when the slave lifts up the master, he acquires him, shivcha kananis tikne bebia. We spoke about the shivcha and the eved kanani. We said they have limited to certain ways of acquisition. And even in the Gemara we said, unlike Yavama, shivcha kanani acquired bia. The Gemara should be acquired when he has bia with them. In the Maisa bia. So you just told me that by the slave lifts up the master, the kinyanim, he's lifted up. We say the point of slavery that it's chazak. Only the master is getting pleasure, and the slave is paying. That's an act of chazak. Here, both having pleasure. It's an act of bia. It's an act of intimacy. The chemicals that are coursing through the oxytocin that everyone's getting in this slavery. Says Gemara. To say if it's unnatural, where there's no pleasure, and in the act of intimacy he's getting lifted up, he should acquire her because. So Amar of Achai Barada de Min Achai says, first of all, Shas, who says Bia Shlekadarka considered tsar or is not? Who said that first of all they're both not having pleasure? Void, moreover, Mishkeve Ishiksiv. We have a pasuk that when it talks about homosexuality, it says if a man is labored a male, Mishkeve Isha, which in the plural is Hekisha Kosav Kedarko L'Shaloi Kedarko. The pasuk is according to the natural way, the two of them. Therefore, we see there's no difference between regarding the you're not going to acquire because zenena v'zenena. That even the unnatural way, even if it would be technically, you wouldn't differentiate. Not acquiring a shivcha kananas with the ma'isa bia. Now the Gemara brings the story to end this by saying. From a Hindu, he was a ger she'en lo yershin hava. He was a convert. He converted to Judaism. Now he didn't have any kids, so he had no relatives. Cholash, he became sick. Al Chazi the takav le'amatu that a hold of him that he was in the throes of tilting towards. So Amar to the slave of the ger, shalif li misane, take off my shoes, Vamtinu lebesa, and bring it to my house. Why was he saying this? This guy had these slaves. His intent with chazaka. When his master dies, he'll be on his way with the shoes, taking it to the house. He'll be doing an act. Now, Ikadami, some say that Gadol Hava. This slave was an adult. So he's very careful that this slave should not have a moment to acquire himself. Died, he wanted to go on him. Zeh, the ger, was Pirish Lamisa. He separated to death. He separated to life in place of him, that the slave should not have a moment without a master. Now, that's how some say it. Some say that couldn't have, but actually the slave was a minor. And even Abba Shol says, whoever takes possession of the minor will be Zamar, even after later. Ger Shemei, if a convert dies, who Vizvazu Yisrael in the Chasab, and now the Jews, everyone's just taking whatever it's hefker because there's no relative. Everyone's taking their stuff. Now there were slaves. So the time they were adults of minors. No, they could acquire themselves as free people. Even a minor would be able to acquire. This story of Marzuchu was told like the Tanakama. Was a minor because the minor himself could also, not like Abba Shol, because Abba Shol, he says, go. Only Taisus finds this very. On Rashi, why wouldn't he run? He would try to beat out someone else or whatever. Taisus has a different shot in how to learn this, but this is how Rashi learns it. So therefore, these are the two. Wanted to make sure he has him a slave, either as an adult, because he's going to go make himself be ready en route when he dies. No. To my house, I sent him at 2. And then he's going. He's already doing my Ma'aseh Chazaka as a Kenyan, and then as a cotton would also be the same thing again. But Taisus has a very different interpretation. Thank you.